Okay, real quick. How many of you had a conflict this week? It has been quite a week.
Us included. Our hands are up.
All right, can we spill the tea for a second? This
Oh, someone's excited. Oh, okay.
This has been a really rough week. Like, okay, so we came into this, we knew that we'd be talking about communication and conflict like a couple weeks out. We knew that we were preparing for this. So Monday we got together for the sermon prep process and we were like,
this was the smoothest brainstorming time
we're
ever.
Good. Like,
yes, let's talk about this.
We're both communicators. We fought hard for this. Like we do conflict pretty well. In the beginning of our marriage, it was
a learning experience.
That's the eternal optimist. I would say it was rough, but we've worked really hard. We've had a lot of
few years,
resources,
we've really learned.
help, counseling. This week,
for some reason, and it's so funny because we were so excited to come to you on this Sunday, give you a message to encourage you, to let you know, here are some tips and some advice on how to do conflict well. And for some reason, we could not do conflict well this week.
We fought almost every single day this past week. And that is really not normal. If we have a conflict now, we've kind of figured out, okay, this is how we go about it. And it usually lasts for that specific conversation for the most, maybe a day, right? We fought every day this week.
I know.
And it was kind of like the same fight. Y'all know how this goes, like the same fight over and over again. And then you resolved it, but then the next day you bring it up again and you're like, wait, I thought we talked about that. It's like, no, I am not okay yet. And so that was this week. And it got to a point by Friday where we were both like, I don't even want to preach this stupid message. Forget this. It was tough. And thankfully, by the grace of God, we were able to work it out.
We really were.
We did. We really did work it out.
And it's so funny because in the midst of those conversations that we were having, it was almost like I was chuckling on the inside because I'm like, the enemy is just trying to get at us. We know what we're called to on Sunday. We know that we're about to bless a ton of marriages, a ton of couples. And it's like the enemy is here just trying to tear us apart, make us question what it is that we're supposed to do. And sometimes God sets things up to really allow us to live things out so that we can really minister to people.
That's right.
We're so grateful for that. Grateful.
Yeah, and we want to thank you for being one of the main reasons why we got through our conflict this week, because if it wasn't for you, we might have sat in that longer than we needed to.
Accountability is good.
And I talk about this, that some of y'all, can I just be real? Some of y'all have way too much time to fight. It's for real. You have way too much time to fight because you have not taken that next step yet to take responsibility for pouring into other people's lives. See, for us, if we didn't have you staring at us on Sunday morning, we could have dragged that thing out for a week or even longer and said, you know what, forget this. We're going to bed angry. We're just not going to deal with it and kind of stick our feet in the sand. But because we know that we'd have to look at you on Sunday morning, and neither one of us want to be fake, put on a show, or have to pretend, because I don't think either one of us is even capable of
I don't think I'm capable of it, yeah.
That it's because we have a responsibility to you that it has helped us move through our own conflicts. And I want to encourage some of you, if you would just take that next step to start an e-group, to pour into somebody else's life, to mentor a younger couple, to build a relationship with other people within this church, you would get into your arguments and look at each other and say, you know what?
We need to end this. We need to finish this up.
We don't have time for this.
Yes, Lord, come into this situation and let us settle it.
And so maybe that's a good encouragement for somebody here today. Take some initiative this week to pull somebody into your life. Start pouring into other couples. You may feel like you're not ready or you're qualified. Listen, we're not perfect. We're in process. We had to deal with our own stuff this week, but that's God's qualifiers for allowing us to be honest and to be used by him, because ultimately, God's not looking for perfection. He's looking for your availability. And if you're available, he will use you. Come on, can somebody say amen to that? All right, so We want to talk about conflict and communication in marriage, and we want to really teach from a passage that maybe you wouldn't think about passage being about relationships, but it's found in Numbers chapter 20. So if you're got your Bibles, you got your notes open up to Numbers chapter 20. We're going to read through this passage together. And the context of this story is that the Israelites have been freed from Egypt, right? They've been delivered out of slavery, but they are now in the wilderness, in the in-between between where they used to be and where they're called to be. And so we pick up in Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. Babe, why don't you read that?
All right. It says, in the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin. They stayed at Kadesh. There, Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into the wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them.
Man, how many of us have a plan going into conversations that we're going to be level-headed, we're going to stay chill, come on, I'm not going to get defensive, and then the moment you see their face or the moment you hear their tone, everything changes, right? This is Moses here. He goes before God, and God is like, look, I know you're walking through something difficult right now. Speak to the rock. Come on, some of you feel like you're speaking to a rock. You feel like you're talking to a rock. Some of you, it's that immovable object, and it's uncontainable force, and it's as soon as he gets in front of them, he leaves the glory of the Lord. He leaves the church service, and he looks at those people, and he says, you rebel, horrible, you jerk. And then he strikes the rock he was supposed to speak to.
And the incredible thing is that Moses is a great person. Mm-hmm. He's a leader. He is known to be so obedient to God. He was humble. He was passionate. He was chosen to be the prophet who would lead these Egyptians out of bondage. The Israelites out of bondage. And though he was great in so many ways, his inability to handle this heated moment led to him not being able to enter into the promised land.
And that dysfunction didn't come out until they walked into the desert. And I think that for many of us, it's in relational deserts that we experience the true dysfunction that's kind of hidden underneath the surface in our lives. Come on, what is a relational desert? It's a place in your marriage, in your family dynamic, where you are not receiving what you are used to receiving on an ongoing basis to sustain you. It's where you're so used to receiving intimacy that now you're in a sexless place. You're so used to receiving affirmation and understanding, and now the person that loves you the most can't even see your perspective. It's in the place where you're so used to conversation and connection, and now you haven't spoken with that person in weeks. And we all experience, whether it's a week long, a day long, or years long, we all experience relational deserts in our relationship dynamics to where the thing that we are so used to is taken away from us. And now the person that we've trusted and relied upon so vulnerably to be that person, to provide those things for us, is now either withholding or even incapable of providing those things for us. And it's in that place that we find our differences, and the desert season release dysfunction into our lives that spirals our connection into disaster.
We have to make decisions on what that desert place is going to look like. We have to decide how we're going to function, what we're going to do when we encounter those deserts. The truth is, we will get into deserts. We can't avoid it. We're gonna get into conflicts. We're going to have disagreements. But it's important for us to be able to settle and decide what are the parameters, what are we working towards before we get into those places.
That's right.
So that way we can be successful coming out of it.
And that's good for the singles here today. Even if you're not in a relationship, you can make these decisions now that this is the person you're going to be. That this is the type of Christian, the type of man, the type of woman that you are going to be to prioritize the right things. Because I know that it seems like you're never gonna experience challenges. You're never gonna walk through difficulties in your marriage. They'll never hurt you that way. You're in the honeymoon season and everything is amazing and perfect and this person is just great, but that person is a human being. They're going to let you down. And even if they don't plan on it, they will disappoint you. They may walk through something so difficult in their life that not even because they want to, but because they walk through loss or grief, they are incapable of giving you the things that you think you need. We've been watching this show. One of our favorite shows is called Couples Therapy, and literally is a show watching couples get therapy. And so often the responses of each individual is this: they're just not giving me what I need. And all I want to do is reach through the TV and say, if you're not getting that from Jesus, your hope in another person fulfilling that in you will only be let down and disappointed. And so we've got to be preemptive and plan. It's that age-old saying, right? Fail to plan. If we don't plan on making these decisions before we enter the desert, then the desert will destroy the destiny that God has for your relationship. Conflict is inevitable, but it's either going to be constructive or destructive to your relationship.
And I think also in the deserts, that's where we really have to decide that we need to fight for each other and not fight against each other.
That's right.
It's so easy to fight against each other, but throughout this message today, throughout our time over the next hour, less than an hour, we're going to explore some of the ways that we can set parameters so that we can be successful in the midst of conflict.
So the two things that we want to give you today are decisions that you can make, kind of measurements of success for your relationship so that you can accomplish not only what God wants you to do, but that you can thrive in the midst of conflict no matter what comes up. And those two things are goalposts and ground rules. You've got to set goalposts and ground rules before you ever play the game. Come on, how many competitive people in the room? You're competitive. You like to win. I'm this type of person. I don't believe in participation trophies. There's a winner and there's a loser, okay? And today the winners will be the Kings, right? That's just what it's going to be. In Jesus' name. Okay? So in order to know who the winner is, there needs to be a measurement for success. Like, how do we know that we won? Either you score more points or less points. Whatever the measurement of success is, there is a goalpost so that we know that we are succeeding and that we are winning. In your marriage and in your relationship, you need to set the right goalposts so that you can achieve the measurement of success to know that you're actually accomplishing something. So in other words, the goalpost, it answers the question, what's the win?
Yeah.
How do we know that we're winning? And the goalpost that we really want to talk to you about today, it's found in the final verse in this scripture. Why don't you bring our attention back to that?
Verse 12, it says, "But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." This first goalpost is something that we're extremely passionate about when it comes to all marriages and relationships. Goalpost number one is unity. The priority of a partnership and a relationship should be connection. It should be togetherness. Last 2 weeks ago, we said, a partnership shouldn't look like just cohabitation. It needs to look like connection, but it definitely shouldn't look like separation.
Right.
And I think in the midst of our relational deserts, it's so easy to separate. So easy to be against each other, to want that separation, to push each other away from one another.
Yeah, to play the blame game, right? Moses, it's your fault. You led us here. Or it's the Israelites' fault. You're just rebellious. You don't even love God, right? And it's so easy to start pointing the finger at each other and playing the blame game and isolating and polarizing each other.
And then get lost in that.
100%.
It's just now back and forth, back and forth. You take a jab, I take a jab, and then it's like, where are we going going with this?
Right.
You know, in that point in that like argument where you're like, what are we arguing about? Can this end? Yes. What does that ending look like? And the point is for us, goalpost is unity. It's coming back together and being reunified.
And unity is not uniformity. Being unified in a marriage does not mean that we think the same thing every single time. And this is really important in Christian marriages because I think sometimes we have this idea that because we're Christians and because we're, God's in the midst, that we should just agree on everything all the time. Come on, married couples, can we just all dismiss that myth? That's just not real. I said 2 weeks ago that when you come to the altar and you give your life to this other person, that you lay your life down because things on an altar, things die, right? That does not mean that you lose your individuality as a human being. Your individuality is what makes the marriage beautiful. The fact that we're different. My wife and I, we see almost everything differently. And from our conflicts that we had this week that we did resolve, I can still tell you, we don't see them the same way. I still see it my way and she still sees it her way. But we have found a way to be unified despite our differences. And in the midst of those differences, allow those things to bring us together. The problem is that in the midst of differences arising, that can start to make you feel really lonely, right? Have you ever had an argument with somebody that you were super close to and it took you off guard that their perspective was so different than yours? It immediately triggers emotions of, oh my gosh, do we have the same values? Do we see the same things as important? Are we on such different places that now there's a chasm and we spiral, right, into this separation? So what do? We start fighting for our perspective and our opinion to try to create a level of superiority to hopefully change that person to agree with us. I think those of us who've been married for a minute can say that doesn't work. It will never work. You cannot change that person's mind by trying to force them to see things your way. But what you can do is realize that there is a greater priority than your opinion. And that priority is unity and oneness together.
Let me read Matthew 19:6. It says, what God has joined together, let no man separate. And it's funny because in our relationships, oftentimes we feel like we are the guards of our relationship. Like ladies, when you like have cat eyes, like what's happening around your relationship, the people that are entering into your lives, and it's almost like, Men, you're looking and it's like, oh, I saw the way he looked at you. I saw. Ain't no one sliding into his DMs, ain't no one sliding into her DMs, right?
He just wants to be your friend.
Right, okay.
Okay.
And it's so easy for us to get offended by the outside forces, like the people outside, and it's up to us to protect our unity, to protect our relationship, to say, ain't no one coming in and dividing this household. No one's coming in because God put us together, and because of that, no person is going to separate us. And the funny thing is that in the midst of conflict, in the midst of those deserts, the question that I have for you is, are you the one that's causing separation in your own relationship? When you're mad at your spouse, are you the one that's pushing them away? You get so mad when someone else steps even close to your relationship, yet you're the one pushing them away. You're the one that's taking blows below the belt. You're the one that's saying hurtful things. You're the one that's giving them the silent treatment. And the question that we have for ourselves is, man, I don't want to be that person. Let me not be the one to separate my own marriage.
And I think we do that because it's in these moments we kind of revert back to survival mode, right? Like I just got to do what I got to do to get out of this or to survive or to kind of lift myself up because I keep feeling pushed down. But a moment of superiority often leads you to feeling stranded and alone in the long term. And I think some of us, we do things, we say things, we fight because we've got a short-term problem and we need a short-term solution, but some of our short-term solutions are creating long-term problems. Some of the things you've said to your spouse, they haven't forgotten because it's really, really difficult to get those words out of their mind. The things that you've said, the threats that you've made, the gateways of separation of what we call those lines, things where you throw out the D word, the divorce word, or you say, well, I'm going to leave, or you step out the door. Those are these gateways that now create an unsafe space to where I feel like I can't be myself. But if the fight is for unity, then fighting to win looks like fighting to be one.
Yes.
Fighting for connection, not fighting to always agree, not fighting that this other person sees or hears me, but fighting to be connected through the midst of it. Look at what Ephesians 4, verse 2 through 3 says. It says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort, do everything in your power to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. If you're fighting for anything, you got to fight for unity. You got to fight for connection. Protect the unity in your relationship. And I know that in the midst of conflict, it can be difficult to figure out how do we reconnect. But here's just a few things that practically you can do when you've had conflict and you're kind of at that ending point, like, I don't know where to go. We hit that place this week because we'd fought about pretty much the same thing every single day. We got to the point where it's like, I don't really have anything else to say. Like, I don't know where to go from here. And so a real practical way to reconnect and prioritize godly unity in the marriage is to pray with each other. Now, I know that's like the hardest thing to do after you've just fought with each other and said this stuff.
Sometimes in the middle of it, it's like, all right, you pray.
Yeah, it's not easy. But I'm telling you, this past week, it was like we got to this point and we had resolved it, like, okay, we're moving on from it, but there still was a lack of connection. You know what that's like, right? You walk away and you're not happy with each other. You're not there yet. And that's okay. It may not happen right away. But I looked at her and I said, you know what? Before I go upstairs, let's just pray together. Give me your hand. Let's pray.
You pray.
And I'll pray.
All right, some other practical things. Active listening is really important. And I think in the middle of your conflict, sometimes some of us really struggle with repeating what the other person just said. And it's not because we don't hear it, it's because we're choosing not to acknowledge it.
Right, we don't want to validate their perspective.
We don't. We think that simply repeating it means that we're agreeing with it. And you can be on opposite ends. You can still disagree, but it's so important in the midst of the conversation to actually acknowledge that you hear what the other person is expressing.
And not just the words coming out of their mouth, but the intention of the heart. Yeah. It's that age-old leadership teaching, which is seek to understand first, then to be understood, right? I want to understand what you're saying. So, if we argue about dishes in the sink, or she gets mad at me because every time we walk somewhere, I walk faster than she does, and I'm walking ahead of her, and I leave her in the dust, right? So this is like a continual thing that we talk about. Okay, it's not. So what you're saying is that, like, that's not active listening. Active listening is, okay, you know what? What I hear you communicating is that when I walk in front of you, I'm leaving you by yourself and I'm not prioritizing you or making you feel like you're important enough to be with me, but that I'm the one that's the priority right now. And that's me trying to understand what she's actually trying to say.
And for me, when you talk about the dishes, it's not just about this one moment or this one day where the dishes are there and you're just angry. You often feel like it lands on you, like it's up to you to get the dishes done. And there's this unbalance of chores and responsibilities within the household.
Yeah, we have it on camera now, so. Okay, a couple more practical things that you can do. Ask for forgiveness.
That's what you'll be doing in a little bit.
Some of y'all can't apologize, for real. Some of you can't apologize, and that is a really serious problem in your relationship because there is something so healing that happens when you humble yourself and say, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I hurt you. I didn't intend to, but I'm sorry that I hurt you. Not, I'm sorry that you feel hurt by, that is not an apology, okay? An apology is taking ownership for the way that I affected the person. And for some of you, the reason why there hasn't been healing in your relationship is because apologies are one-sided right now.
Can I tell you, early on in our marriage, something that really impacted the way that we resolved conflict, that made it so much better, that made us healthier at resolving conflict, was him expressing the fact that he felt like every time we got into an argument, it was always up to him to get to a place of starting it first, of apologizing first. And he expressed it in this like broken way of feeling so alone. Like, why is it always up to me to apologize first? And it's incredible because you're willing to lay it down. But for me, when I heard that, as stubborn as I was, and this is for the people who raised their hands when we asked who's the stubborn one in the relationship. A lot of times we leave it up to our partners to give in first. And sometimes we need to lay it down. Sometimes we need to take turns. It's not fair that only one person in the relationship is always the one to get to that place first. It's not easy, but we've got to realize that there needs to be a partnership in forgiveness.
That's really good. One last way that you can do, that you can kind of make up is to have sex.
Makeup sex is a real thing, people.
Now, we're gonna talk a little bit more about this in a couple weeks when we actually talk about healthy sex in a marriage, but I do wanna say this. I know some of you may be thinking to yourself, how is that even a reality or a possibility after we just had a conflict? Well, if the goal is to unify and to reconnect, and although the conflict itself may need more conversations in the future, that doesn't mean that we can't reconnect. And some of you, you hold back connection because you haven't gotten your way yet. That's not okay. And so if we're fighting for connection, and we did this week, after it's resolved, let's have sex. And you think, well, how could we do that? And I think for some of us, especially like in the Christian world, we've made sex to be this thing that there's gotta be this grand, intimate, deep moment. And you know what? Sometimes you can just have sex. Seriously. The physical act of connection bridges the gap, that shared activity, says, you know what? We're fighting past all this stuff and put us both in a better mood.
I'm surprised no one's just
really
yelling
helpful.
out, preach, Pastor.
I'm telling you, it helps.
All right.
Goalposts. Unity needs to be priority in your marriage. But I want to move on to the ground rules because we don't have a lot of time. But this is really important. Just as we set markers for success, we need some boundary lines of what's off limits. Some of us, we don't define these things before we get into relationships, and you find out the hard way because you say stuff that you regret, you do things that are dysfunctional, and instead of speaking gently or passionately, whatever way, you strike what you're supposed to speak to. Now, I'm not talking physically. There's never a place for physical violence ever, period.
Come on.
But I'm using it metaphorically that sometimes in our communication, we strike each other instead of speak to each other. So what are some boundary lines, ground rules that can allow us to win successfully? House rules is what I'd say, because everybody has different house rules, right? Some of you, you're stacking like 15 draw fours in Uno, okay? That's just crazy, okay? Let's go back to the rule book. Let's establish the rules. So let's talk about some of these ground rules. Why don't you share that first one?
All right, the first one is going to be consider the context. I don't know if you missed it, but when you look at the passage that we shared, there was a lot of events that led up to this heated moment. I'm going to take it back to verse 1. It says, in the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived in the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There, Miriam died and was buried. Miriam was Moses' sister. She was one of the leaders in that group. Did you know that Moses was leading, it said, like he was leading a group of 2 million people out of slavery? Can you imagine being in that position of carrying 2 million people out of bondage, out of slavery, in the midst of the desert where everyone is hungry, where everyone is thirsty, trying to get to some place, and it's stressful.
And then your sister dies.
And I think in our regular conflicts in our marriages, a lot of times when we get to a moment of conflict, there were a lot of events that led up to that. And it's hard because we get upset and we focus on that one thing. Oh, it's because of this. And we try to then disprove, like, no, we do this. But it's not about that one thing oftentimes. It's not about what it is that we're pointing to. It's actually just a small piece of what has actually been leading up to it.
Right, and we drag it in regardless of whether we're aware of it or not, right? Because you may be fighting about one thing, but then all of a sudden, boop, you pull something out from the past, and well, this time, and you said, and now all of this context is swirling around, and what builds up eventually finds itself at a breaking point. And we've all experienced this in our relationship dynamics, is that there comes a point where we break under the context of the conflict. And when we disregard what's going on around us, we can't understand the emotions that we're feeling. And a lot of us, what happens is we aren't having clarity around everything that's led up to this point. And so we're letting one small thing, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm in a bad mood. But what that really is a symptom of is something greater, right? Like, what's been going on at work? What's happening with your kids? Like, what's been happening in your finances? There's a lot of other things that are happening in your lives. And when we just look at the one thing in front of us, we miss what we call the big rock. The big rock principle is that there's always a deeper issue that's underlying the symptom that you're arguing over. And if you don't recognize the context, you will rush to conclusions. You will demonize the other person. You will strike back instead of recognizing, man, Moses, you got a tough job right now. You just lost your sister. Man, Israelites, you're grieving from the loss of a leader. You're hungry. You're uncomfortable. Everybody's going through something right now. Maybe we need to give each other a little bit of grace. Maybe we need to have a little bit more patience. Maybe I haven't eaten today. That's a real thing. Like, that's a real thing. Maybe I missed a meal, or maybe the kids have just been screaming their heads off, and I'm not really mad at you, but I'm mad at the kids. Or I'm just tired, or I'm exhausted. And so you gotta consider the context and ask the question, okay, let's step back for a second, pause. What's really going on? What are you walking through right now? Maybe I'm missing something that really matters that's leading to this conflict. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that?
I think in the midst of all of that, I thought about two different things. Number one, a lot of us, we're not willing to go there. We hold back. And to be quite frank, I think it's out of laziness. I think it's, you know what, I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to ask these questions because we're not willing to put in the work. And that's sad. It's sad that we aren't willing to dive a little bit deeper. Some of us, we are comfortable at the surface level. We just want it to be gone. We want it to be done, and we want it to move on. But the truth is, like, if we never actually address that big rock, if we never actually go a little bit deeper, ask those questions, and be willing to even share what is actually happening for ourselves, it's gonna just carry on into the future.
Yeah, there's a great book, one of my favorites. We talk about it a lot at our church and our staff. It's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, and specifically about team dynamics within the workplace, but it really can be applied to marriage. The bottom of the dysfunctions that lead to every other unhealthy habit in our lives is a lack of trust. That lack of trust allows us or hinders us from communicating clearly, taking accountability, and it leads to something called artificial harmony. And some of us, that's where we live in our marriages right now. It's artificial harmony. You think you're good because you're not fighting, but you're not talking about the real stuff. You're not going deeper into what's actually creating bitterness, resentment, and you're not open with each other. And because you're not fighting, you think you're good. Conflict is constructive when there's covenant and commitment a part of it. You need conflict. But if we're not willing to go a little bit deeper and recognize the environment, order our emotions in the midst of it, we'll miss what's going on. The second ground rule that you need to set is speak, don't strike. Once again, using this metaphorically, because it should not even be an option or a question when we talk about physical abuse. That should never, ever, ever, ever play a part into your relationship. But when we talk about the way we talk to each other, sometimes because the other person feels like we're talking to a rock, it's easy to strike instead of speak. Because why would I speak to that person? I'm not gonna get anything out of them. And when we talk at each other like objects instead of talking to each other as individuals, here's what happens. You produce short-term solutions while creating long-term dysfunction. Sure, they got water from the rock. The solution happened immediately. But guess what happened for Moses? He didn't get to go to the promised land. All that work, all that time, all that effort, all that trust in God. And he didn't get to go into the promised land with the people that he was supposed to be a part of. And that's what happens when we choose not to connect and understand emotion and create a safe enough space for us to connect in the way that we need to. And this is something that we really dealt with this week a little bit when it came to emotions.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but when I get super passionate, tears start coming out. Like, or who is that person in the relationship? Okay, there you go.
Happens,
you
right?
can't help it. And it's not that you're trying to like manipulate the situation, or you're not trying to just make the other person pay for something. It's that when you get so passionate, the tears just start rolling, but I'm still thinking, I'm still expressing. And, you know, he's given me, my husband has been very gracious in our relationship to never take offense to that, to never just be like, oh, here we go again, like you're crying again.
It's not easy.
Right.
Because come on, for real, like as soon as they start crying, it's kind of like trump card. You know what I mean? Like, dang it, like, okay, because as a man, I'm built to be a protector. That's the worst thing for a man to watch is his wife cry, especially if I was the cause of it. Absolute worst thing. And so it violates everything we're a part of. I don't want to hurt her. You know, even in the midst of our worst conflicts, I'm not trying to hurt her or cut her down. I want her to feel safe. But when she cries, it's tough to feel like I have any leg to stand on now because that feels like it's game over.
Well, it's also important, though, that like I realize, yes, tears might come out in the middle of conversation, and oftentimes it's actually a sign of vulnerability. It's because I'm being vulnerable for that first moment. That's when he starts noticing it's like, okay, she's actually being real about what she's expressing here. So, gentlemen, when she starts crying, just keep in mind that's probably when she's actually trying to express something to you.
Right, it's not manipulation,
Right.
It's not trying to twist it.
And I don't go crazy. I don't do like the waterworks and try to create a scene. That's not what it is. Yeah. That's not what it is. But something was unlocked in our relationship. Like literally we received a key to unlock something in our relationship this past week. And it was this moment when in the midst of our conflict, my husband started to express like anger in him like sharing in the conflict. And I try to shut that down. Like I'm not gonna indulge this. I'm not going to get into this if you're gonna act that way, or if you're going to speak that way, like I feel like it's a bit too much.
Now, granted, give me the benefit of the doubt. When we talk about anger, right, that anger is not directed towards her.
Right.
We don't curse at each other. We don't say things that cut each other down. But my communication style is different than hers. And I've noticed this a lot even with men, that the way that we express vulnerability oftentimes looks different than women. It's not always cut and dry, men and women. Sometimes it blends all together. But what I've recognized for myself is that oftentimes the moments I am the most vulnerable comes out a little bit unpolished and a little bit more passionate than she would like within the conversation. And just as I want to make sure she feels safe enough to express her emotions, even though I don't always like it or agree with it, what I had to communicate to her this week was sometimes when I'm expressing more passionately, that is me fighting to be heard and to express vulnerability that you have asked me time and time again, share your feelings, share your emotions, right, men? That's what we're told our whole lives. Come on, share your feelings, share your emotions. And then when you do, you're punished for it because the way you share your emotions is different. It's not always polished. Sometimes it is anger. And you've been taught that that's wrong. I want you to hear what the Bible says about that. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, it says, be angry and do not sin. Anger in itself is not sin. Jesus responded in anger when he saw injustice happening at the temple. But that anger was not directed towards cutting other people down, cursing them, making them feel small, That anger was righteous anger and indignation that expressed his passion towards what was right and holy towards God. And what I want to encourage some of the women in this room, or maybe even some of the men, this is something you learn in counseling, it's that it's almost like telling someone that's grieving to stop being angry. There is no more gaslighting, dismissive way to shut somebody down than to tell them that what they're expressing or what they're going through, they need to stop that and shut it down. And some of you wives, you've asked your husbands to express his feelings and to be emotional. And the reason why he doesn't do that is because he's so afraid that if he does that, it will hurt your feelings, or
he's going to pay for it.
He's going to pay for it, or he's going to be judged for that. And the reality is that the way he may be expressing vulnerability is different than you. And the Bible also says, Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath. Maybe when he expresses vulnerability in that way, you can say this: wow, I didn't know you felt that way. Wow, I can tell right now that this is something that goes deep inside your heart. Do you know what that does for someone who is vulnerable? Just as if someone is breaking down and crying, you say, wow, I realize this really hurt you. I really must have hurt you this way. It provides understanding and a space of safety. Now listen, men, your anger and your passion is not an excuse to live from the flesh, okay? That's not what the Bible says here. But it is also an opportunity for you to be understanding and to give grace and to create a space where we can express what is going on. There's safety here. Not directing that towards others and getting angry at each other and cutting each other down, but saying, wow, thank you for expressing your fear of inadequacy. Thank you for expressing the fact that you don't feel respected here, or the fact that you don't feel heard. Thank you for trusting me enough to show me that response that I know you're afraid that people might judge you for that, but I know here you won't get judgment like that. That level of connection, what it does is it creates a space where we can actually share with one another what's really going on. And now we're not fighting against each other and having to walk on eggshells. No, we're creating a space to say, wow, I'm with you in this. And ultimately, I want you not only to be heard, but I want us to move forward together in this. And so I pray that you hear this, that it's our responsibility as a couple to create an environment within our marriage where we're not constantly taking offense to each other, but that we're creating a space of understanding and safety and acceptance to now where our conflicts and conversation is us not fighting at each other, it's fighting together to get somewhere as a couple, as a unit. And so, men, women, if your response, if the way you express emotion isn't to cry, but it is more passion, or maybe you find yourself, tame that. Learn how to do it in a constructive way. Don't channel that anger towards your partner, but do it in a way that expresses vulnerability. Maybe you need to cut through the emotion of that and realize, you know what? This anger is actually really me expressing that I've been hurt. And I feel like I'm backed into a corner right now, and I'm in survival mode, and I need you to understand that. I don't need you to judge that. But you gotta do some work in making sure that it's done in a healthy way. And on the other end of that, try to create a space where people can be honest about what's going on, where they don't feel judged for the emotions that they're expressing.
We want to encourage you to always look for reconciliation. Think in the midst of the conflicts, in the midst of the fights, it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then what are you waiting for? Are you waiting to just tire each other out and just kind of be left with this and live with it? I think there should always be this heart to just, let's get this settled. Let's become one again.
Yeah.
It's so important, and I know it's hard. It's funny because I had written this before we got into a fight, and in the middle of the fight, I knew what I was supposed to do, and it was still hard to do it, even though I knew what I was supposed to do. That's real. And what finally got me to a place of longing for reconciliation was conviction, was godly conviction of just feeling like, God, I know what you want. I know what you're looking for from me. And even if I'm upset with my partner, even if I don't even like my partner right now, I love you. I love the Lord, and the Lord has called me to do certain things that I need to just move forward in. You know, when we look at this story, the issue that God comes back to Moses with is that he says, you didn't trust me. You didn't believe in me. You didn't present me as holy before the people. And I thought, throughout that conflict, I thought to myself, man, I'm not doing my job to really love God the best way that I can right now. I'm not presenting him as holy, because if he was, I'd be willing to just lay it down, put down the defenses, put it all down, and really seek to reconcile. And I just want to encourage you all today, in the midst of the conflicts, in the midst of the things that you're going through right now, it's hard, it's real. But you can look to the Lord. You can look up and say, God, I'm going to lay this down because I trust you and I love you. I want to do right with you.
If becoming like Jesus and loving like Jesus is the top priority in your marriage, then the win will always be that your marriage looks like Christ. And I think we always use that as a temperature gauge for us is, okay, do our conflicts reflect the love of Christ? No, we're not perfect. Yes, we make mistakes, but at the end of it, what I love about our marriage, and we've fought for this, we've had to wrestle through this, but I know and am convinced that no matter what conflict we have, it is the number one priority of both parties in this partnership to reconcile, to reconnect, and to honor God in the way that we treat each other. You know, watching that show, Couples Therapy, it's so tough to watch at times because I look at it and I said to her, I don't know how you can have a marriage without biblical values and Christ being the center of it. If there is not a guiding light, a defining line, if there is not one thing that we both mutually agree to as to what we are going after, what this is supposed to look like, then what is the win? And then we get stuck into these cycles of just fighting for self-preservation and self-protection. I gotta look out for me and my happiness. But when we realize that our marriage is supposed to reflect Christ, then that means that no matter what conflict we have to reconcile. We have to come back together.
Yes.
The Bible says he's given us the ministry of reconciliation. And so maybe you're in that today. And I want you to stand with us as we close. Maybe you're in this place today. Maybe you're in the midst of a fight right now. Maybe you don't know how you're gonna get out of where you are. What I want you to know is that Jesus is a restorer, he's a redeemer, he is a healer. If you invite him in and you say, you know what, let's prioritize going after God in our marriage, going after God in our singleness, man, what's gonna happen is you're gonna have a true north compass that's gonna help you reconnect and redirect. Be the first to apologize, humble yourself, love one another. You know what, you're gonna walk through seasons of deserts in your marriage. May not be intentionally. Your spouse may lose a parent. They may be grieving and you can't do anything to fix it, and they are not emotionally able to show up like they used to in a past season. But if your hope is in them, and if you're looking to them to be your source and your solution, you will be disappointed and let down. Sometimes they'll walk through mental health challenges, they'll walk through seasons of life of confusion and whatever, but if Jesus is the center, I'm not looking to you to fulfill me, I'm looking to you to participate in loving you like Christ loved me.